Hi. To make any gear build in Throne and Liberty, you must understand how stats work and the hidden conditions for each. Evasion is not the best for every gear build, and Endurance is not either. I'll get into this and more, and I'll try to keep this video short. All formulas and hidden conditions for stats I will share in this video have been thoroughly tested by myself and friends such as Jerichao, Godsend, Rylock, and Ace, and several guilds on KR have completed and done the same test, receiving the same results, so it's not brand new information. I hope to spread this info as much as possible so more people on NA are informed and don't make mistakes with their gear. I want to clear up something very important before we get further into the video. This is something everyone needs to understand. In the game, for various stats, it'll tell you that for every 10 points, it equals to 1% for that stat. This is true, but what is also true is that there are diminishing returns as soon as you start building a stat. So because of this, 1,000 critical hit chance does not equal 100% crit chance. So you really need to understand the formulas and secret conditions that I'm about to explain in this video so you can build your characters correctly. So let's start off with hit versus evasion. This is the formula for hit versus evasion. If you have equal or less evasion than your enemy, you have a 0% evasion chance. If you have 500 more evasion, for example, than the enemy, you have a 33% evasion chance when using this formula. If you have a 1,000 more evasion than the enemy, you have a 50% evasion chance. And if you have 2,000 more evasion than the enemy's hit, you have a 66% evasion chance. So this is how evasion and hit interact with each other, and it's very important to remember when gearing. Evasion gives you an RNG chance to straight up dodge an attack, causing it to do no damage or CC to you. Evasion is thus extremely strong if stacked high, but it is countered by the enemy's hit stat. If the enemy has higher hit than your evasion stat does nothing. That means it is not worth putting in small amounts of evasion, and you must stack it really high. Hit is one of the main stats DPS build to ensure they do not miss their attacks often. The average hit most DPS run is around 800 to 1000, with great swords averaging 1000 to 1300 with their passive, so it's very high. So with this understanding, daggers are the best and main weapon that should be building evasion. SNS is also good, but mainly for frontline tanks since the passive requires you to be surrounded by enemies to receive the additional evasion, which means Wand SNS, for example, Wand SNS healers specifically, playing away from the front line might find it hard to activate that passive. Now let's get into crit and endurance. This is a formula for crit versus endurance, or how they interact with each other. If you have equal or less crit than an enemy's endurance, you have a 0% crit chance. If you have 500 more crit, for example, than the enemy's endurance, you have a 33% crit chance. If you have 1,000 more crit than the enemy's endurance, you have a 50% chance. So as you can see already, this is very similar to how hit and evasion interact with each other, but there are some key differences. So when you crit, it does a max damage of your attack. And you know you crit because the number is usually much bigger and it lingers a bit on your screen. And when it comes to endurance, similar to evasion, you must stack it really high for it to feel like you're effectively countering crit. If you have equal or more endurance than the enemy's crit, they'll never crit against you, which is something important to remember. And if you have more endurance than the enemy's crit, all extra endurance is converted into a glancing chance that forces the minimum damage for the enemy's attack. And that glancing formula is this. So you can see sort of the key differences here when it comes to endurance and crit and hit and evasion. And with this understanding, if you do not run a dagger or SNS, run endurance. Without a dagger or an SNS, you won't have enough evasion to effectively counter any properly geared DPS. So endurance will be your next best option to effectively mitigate damage. You can easily stack 800 to 1000 endurance with T1 gear and between 1000 to 1300 melee endurance. With a longbow, you can stack endurance the highest when including your passive. The main thing to remember when it comes to endurance and evasion is that endurance always applies no matter what. So even if the enemy has more critical hit than you, your endurance is always being subtracted against their critical hit to reduce their critical chance. That does not happen when it comes to hit and evasion. So when it comes to skill damage boost and skill damage resistance, the skill damage boost formula is as follows, and the skill damage resistance is as follows. Skill damage boost comes mainly from traits on your necklace and 2 rings. Skill damage resistance comes from your cape, belt, and bracers. These stats are multipliers for your damage done and damage taken, so they are extremely important. Skill damage boost can also be found on staff in its passive, and it also counts towards increasing healing. So that's why staff is another great weapon to pair with a healer build, because skill damage boost further increases the amount that you heal. When it comes to heavy attack chance, this is a formula that you must understand. So on top of crit RNG, you have another stat that can double the damage that you do. When this procs, you will see a ×2 next to your damage. It's very satisfying to hit both a crit and a heavy attack, as you can imagine, and you just completely blow someone up. Unfortunately, this stat is very hard to come by and mostly comes from weapon traits at the start. In my opinion, I think heavy attack chance should be removed from the game, but that's just my opinion, and yeah, some folks may think differently. Bonus damage and damage reduction. Bonus damage adds a flat amount to every line of damage that you do. So for example, with 100 bonus damage, a skill that hits for 3000 will just simply hit for 3100, so it's a straight 100 increase. A skill that hits 4 times for 500 each, and a 100 damage bonus will now hit for 4 times for 600 each. So with this understood, this stat is only good for weapons that attack fast, and currently that is just the Expo. And damage reduction is a stat that tanks stack. Tanks counter barrier damage scales off of the stat. So it is important to increase this stat if you want to reflect a good amount of damage back to attackers as an SNS. It reduces a flat amount of damage at the end of the damage formula. So if you're already tanky, having high DR will make you even tankier. And the current limited test is showing damage reduction lowers damage in PvP by this following formula. Damage reduction ×2. When it comes to buff duration, debuff duration, cooldown speed, all of these stats use the same formula, and it's also pre-calculated for you in game, or they're the only stats that the game pre-calculates for you for some reason, and that formula is as follows. When it comes to buff duration and debuff duration, the buff duration increases the duration of all buffs by the percentage that it shows you in games, including buffs from other players. It's important if your weapon relies on strong buffs. Debuff duration reduces the amount of time you are affected by debuffs. This can be very good if you heavily stack it up so that you can reduce debuffs by half its duration. And just to clarify, your buff duration determines the length of a buff received from another player. When it comes to defense, this is the formula for defense. Defense is a stat on all armor and accessories, and it provides you base damage reduction from all attacks. Typically, plate armor has more melee and range defense, and high rarity gear has higher defense. Finally, we have chance and resistance. This is a formula for chance and resistance. So to get into this, let's say your base chance for weaken is 20%. Right? And for example, Bell Expo's chance of poisoning is a 20% chance. If you have 250 more resistance, which is more than 50% than the enemy's chance, you lower that 20% chance to 10%. So you're simply halving it. So this pretty much wraps up all I really wanted to share about all the stats in the game and the hidden conditions for each of the stats. I think it's very important to understand all of this and for your guild mates to understand all of this before they waste lucent or time farming certain gear pieces, because when you understand this, you will understand what works and does not work for the weapons that you want to play. I might have missed some things, and I apologize if I did. I was trying to go really fast and condense this video as much as possible so it's not too long. But if you have any questions, please feel free to ask in the comment section below. In the description of this video, I'll also include a written version of everything I spoke about in this video, and I'll include some additional information as well for anyone who just wants to know more. But yeah, thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe. Please share if you found the video helpful. Thank you.